This is the Dixon standard iron. This is chunky, this is huge. Their standard irons are quite chunky. You tend to find that the length of the slot that the tooth makes is between 3 and 3.5 mil or so. That is going to require some chunky thread, but just because it's big doesn't mean it's not going to work. Now, Dixons make their irons in Walsall in Birmingham by hand. They're handmade, hand ground, hand cut, and to be honest, they look it. They do. You can see the remnants of the grindings. There's an uneven element to them, and they could look shinier. But given the fact that they are hand cut and hand ground, they look good enough. They certainly do the job, and that's the main thing. Now, I have emailed Dixon's, but I've had no response back in relation to what the steel is that they use for the irons. I'm making a leap here, and I could be wrong, and I will be corrected, especially if Dixon's get in touch, that I think it's mild steel. I don't think it's drop forged. I think it's made out of a mild steel chunk of, basically cut from a slab. The reason that I think it's mild steel is the thinner irons, the slimline ones, bend if you catch them or drop them. Certainly the two prongs, they're very prone to bend, and as a result that seems soft, so I'm thinking they're made from mild steel. The standards don't bend because there's so much steel here. They are massively chunky. I mean, this thing's virtually 10 mil thick. That's a massive piece of steel. The teeth are, well, the length of the teeth don't really matter. I mean, the 7.3 mil from the point to the bit where they meet up with the body, but you're never going to force that all the way in anyway. You can see that there's a taper to this, and from this 10 mil section tapering down to about 2.6 mil, that's where all the work is done, a mil from the end. If you drive it in any further than that, you're just going to make the hole massive, and obviously if you go into there, that's a 10 mil hole and it's ruined. And the difficulty with that is, especially with the teeth being so broad, 3.5 mil, if you make the hole bigger, you're reducing the amount of leather between each hole, and that reduces the strength. So it doesn't matter how strong a thread you use, if you cut away all of your leather, then you're going to make it a point of serration, and that's going to make it quite weak. They haven't changed the design for many years. It's a very traditional looking pricking iron. Yes, it could be a little shinier. Yes, it possibly could be harder steel to last longer, but it certainly does the job. I trained with these, I've been using them for years, and they've served me well. Pretty much everything that you've seen me stitch so far has been stitched on Dixon irons, or stitched using Dixon irons. So let's just pop it onto the line, get a nice straddle on there, so to speak, and then give it a smack. Now that leaves a nice impression. Big holes, and you can see that because of the length of the hole, the distance between the hole is quite narrow, but certainly over this size stitch, this is 6 stitches to the inch, there's enough space there between to catch the leather and get a good grip, and you are going to get a nice big chunky stitch. But the size of this hole here, I mean, if we use 0.6, it's just going to get lost, and you're just going to see little black lines in between big massive holes. So we're going to have to go up to at least 1 mil, possibly 1.2 mil in thread to justify the size of these holes. But that in itself will look nice as well. So I think I'm going to do the 1.2 mil, because it's a big hole, stitch it with that and see what that looks like. Because ultimately, yeah, if we look at this, and we looked at some of the other irons which are machine made and very pretty, and certainly some of them are tool steel and hardened, that's an attractive quality in a tool, strength, but this does the job. You're looking at somewhere in the region, certainly for going from the 2 prongs up to the sort of 12 SPI 1.5 inch, you're looking between 27 up to 80 quid plus VAT plus postage. So a set isn't going to be cheap. They are going to set you back a few quid if you want a set and a good basic starting iron, I would say, is 7 stitches per inch, 7-8 stitches per inch. Going down to 9 for slightly finer, going up to 6 for something slightly chunkier. So if you had 6, 7, 8 and 9 in the 1.5 inch and the 2 prong, you certainly got pretty much everything that you need there to create all sorts of articles. But just by working that out, you're looking at a good few £100, and prices can add up very, very quickly. So let's have a look at the stitching, just to finish off. It's a slab of steel, it's roughly finished, lots and lots of marks from grinding, a little bit of uneven grinding, but ultimately these bits are what you're paying for, and these are the bits that do the job, and you can see certainly from that it does the job. So let's see how it stitches. Okay, set to go. I'm going to use bonded polyester again, tiger thread, as is pretty much the constant here at the workshop. I'm using number 4 needles. It could go bigger, but that's big enough, I think. And I'm using a 2-inch awl, so a lot chunkier, a lot bigger. The awl isn't the full width of the hole. I just want to go for the centre of the hole, and if I can prevent that hole opening up too much, I will do. But big massive hole, even with that huge hole, the 1.2mm thread still has a little bit of a niggle going through. And that's a huge thread. Having been playing with the 8 stitches per inch irons and using the 0.6mm thread, this is pretty much doubling up in size. Now obviously you've noticed the awl has come into play, because the pricking iron is different to the stitching iron. The stitching iron fully penetrates the leather, the pricking iron doesn't, and you need to finish off the hole and just open it up so you can get the stitch through. 6 stitches to 1 inch is a massive stitch. It tends to be called the racing stitch because the stitches are so long it looks like you're racing to get home to the end. Now, in the grand scheme of things, it certainly makes the 3mm leather seem thin, but massive iron, massive teeth, 6 stitches to the inch. That doesn't look too bad, does it? What I am going to do is just seat that down ever so slightly, close those holes up and seat that thread into place. And even though that is a humongous thread, massive iron and a huge hole, that looks really nice. So just because it's big doesn't mean it's not going to work. It's just upscaling everything, and this is a larger version of the stitch that we've done, and that looks really, really nice, and I'm happy with that. I think anybody, even the back, I need to tap that down ever so slightly as well. This leather does not do the back justice at all. Just trying to clear off that rubbish. But you can see in there is a semblance of the angle. It's just covered in fluff. But the front certainly shows a lovely, even stitch. Very consistent, very, very nice. And if you were to stitch that on an article, you're looking at something slightly chunkier, do that on a belt. Either side of the buckle running back, do it on a nice chunky bag. Any number of things. That would look gorgeous. Contrasting thread, make it a big feature. that works, and the proof is there that you don't need fine, you don't need 12 stitches per inch. You can go 6 stitches per inch and a nice chunky thread and still get a really nice row of stitching. It's tempting to use a longer stitch when you've got a massive run to do, because obviously there's less stitches. 12 stitches to an inch, twice as many. That's a winner. Now this is the Dixon Slimline iron, and you can see the difference from the standard. This is very much thinner. We're talking about 4mm here as opposed to 10 for the handle of the other one, and this obviously proportionately is tapered down very much as well. Now it seems that rather than having a 4mm blank and cutting the iron from that they've ground the Slimline down from the 10mm, and if it'll give you a bit of a profile of that, I don't know if you'll see it or not, but I've got to say the grinding is horrendous. The finish of this iron is quite poor given the cost. I mean, you're looking at 60 odd quid for that. You'd like somebody to take a little bit of effort to finish it nicely and make it look smart. The teeth are ultimately with Dixon's what you're paying for, because these are still ground by hand, so the time that it takes to cut these is obviously where the money's going, and I do appreciate that, but that's not to say that you can't buy a decent quality piece of steel in a blank, so it looks alright at the very least, rather than just roughly grinding it down. I mean, you can't see it in the video, but there's a massive well here where this part has just been ground unevenly. But mild steel, rough grinding, doesn't look pretty at all, it does the job. And that is probably one of the more important things. It does do the job. I've been using these irons for a long time, as I've said, and you see my stitching and you'll see the results. You start smacking this into leather and it is quite clear. Now Dixon's do their Slimline and their standards in 4 widths, which is the 1.5 inch, the inch that I don't have, the 1/2 inch and the 2 prong. Now I'm saying these are mild steel. Again, I'll be corrected, but the reason I think they're mild steel is certainly on the 2 prong teeth. These bend really easy, and that just speaks to me of mild steel. It's not case hardened, it's not forged steel. That's just cut from a 1/2 inch steel, mild steel bar, and then ground by hand and then cut. That's it. There's nothing more to it than that. But again, the truth behind every tool is in how it performs. So we'll look at that just to give you a few more specs. I mean, the width of the tool is 1.2mm. So this can vary because it's hand ground. Yours might be 1.4, it might be 1.1. But that gives quite a narrow stitch, and that's very nice. This is number 8, so this is given 8 stitches per inch, and to be consistent with the other 8 SPI irons that I've had, I shall be using 0.6mm thread, because then we get a good idea of what it looks like across the board. I'll stick that in the middle because then we'll just do 1.5 inches of stitching, and we can then look at how that looks across the board. And there we are, a single smack. We're not looking at penetrating, we are just looking at marking, ready for all work, and that is as even as you like. Yes, it looks rough, yes, it could do with a little bit more love on the finishing, just for presentation if nothing else, because let's face it, we're after these tools to increase the quality of the stitching because we want excellent presentation, and that carries through in the tools. If you can present the tools, and if you are in a workshop like mine where I have students in, and they come along, they pick up your tools, it's nice to have shiny tools to show off a little bit. But the results, you can't argue with that. Yeah, there was a lot that we could improve upon in relation to the looks, but the performance, well, it does the job, and that speaks volumes for itself. So let's see how it stitches. I'm going to be using 0.6mm thread, bonded polyester tiger thread and number 4 needles. So we'll take it to the clam, see how she performs. Okay, now back to the pricking iron. Therefore we need to come back to the awl, and I'm dropping back to the 1.25" awl, polished up. I don't necessarily want to push all the way through. Whilst I'm not going into necessarily teaching about stitching, it's only a small hole, it's 0.6. That's probably about as far as I really want to go. I don't want to be going in an awful lot, just using the tip to open it up that's sufficient to get the needle through to do the stitch. I don't want to make the hole bigger than it absolutely has to be. It's 0.6 thread with number 4 needles. It's going to go through fairly simply. And we can end up with a nice stitch like that. Just as an aside, the other videos that you see on YouTube of mine, I think the vast majority of stitching that you see me do is probably with that pricking iron, the number 8 SPI. So really you can see how much I use it, and the vast majority of stuff that I've made at certainly 8 SPI is with that iron. So yes, I'm whinging about how it looks, but I certainly can't whinge about how it performs, and I'm sure you'll get a better view of this because I'm looking at it from up here, but I'm sure you can see already that this is beginning to show itself quite nicely. It takes a little longer making the holes with the awl. It's part of the traditional process, I suppose. But I think we're getting to the point now where there's two sections of this video. We've got the stitching iron, which fully penetrates the leather, and the pricking iron that partly penetrates the leather, and then we go into the awl. Now you've got to ask yourself the question, the results, how much do they differ? How different are the stitches between the craft sharp stitching chisel to the Dixon pricking iron? Can you tell a difference if you had 4 or 5 pieces of leather all stitched with the same thread, same SPI lined up? Would you tell the difference? That's an interesting question, to the point of I may add an A, B, C and D type thing at the end and give you the opportunity to make your own mind up which is a stitching iron and which is a pricking iron. So there we are, 1.5" of 8 stitches per inch with the Joseph Dixon slimline. Now when you look on the website you won't find the Joseph Dixon slimline irons. You've got to email them and ask for them because they don't openly advertise. Can't see why. The standard irons are quite nice, but I could never understand why you would have an 8 SPI in standard. The teeth are too long. The teeth are the same length, almost 3.5mm. So the slot that you get for 8 stitches per inch is 3.5mm. Well, at 8 stitches per inch you want to be using 0.6mm thread. That's just too big, and you wouldn't be using 1.2mm thread for 8 stitches per inch, so it doesn't make any sense to me. But if you are going to order the standard, get a big 5 stitches per inch. If you go for the slimline, then you're going for the 7, 8, 9s, 10s. But let's just tap that down as we've done with the others, just to give it its best opportunity to impress. And I don't think you can argue with that. That's not bad, is it? Yeah. we can whinge about the quality, and you can see there a little. There we are. Look, we can see the angles are all over the place. There's no evenness to that at all. That is quite ropey. You wouldn't pick it up first if you saw a row of them. However, that's what it produces, and that you can't argue with. It gives you results. It is the ugly sister, but it works. So if you ended up buying the slimline Dixon, 8 stitches per inch, and the ugly sister turned up, don't be put off. Give it a go, give it a try, and see what you think. But that certainly has produced a lovely row stitching. Happy days.